China set to stimulate growth amid global uncertainty. We'll look at some of the key takeaways from China's annual political gathering. Hello, I'm Ahmed Naidu, and this is The Heat. Nearly 3,000 delegates gathered in Beijing's Great Hall of the People for the conclusion of the third session of the 14th National People's Congress. Collectively known as Two Sessions, the NPC is China's top legislature, usually meeting each spring alongside the country's main political advisory body, the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference. CGTN's Huang Fei takes a look at some of this year's key goals and highlights.
Nearly 3,000 lawmakers and senior officials gathered at the Great Hall of the People, celebrating a year of policy achievements and setting the tone for the future. Deputies passed a resolution on the government work report and approved amendments to the deputies law. They also endorsed the 2025 central budget as well as work reports from the country's top legislative and judicial bodies.
大会期间，代表们肩负党和人民的重托。
During the sessions, deputies diligently fulfilled their constitutional and legal duties, aligning with the party central committee's key decisions and the people's aspirations.
经历了务实高效的民主实践。
This year, lawmakers submitted a total of 269 proposals to improve legislation and oversight, and made more than 8,000 suggestions. Many of them aim to promote stronger laws in strategic, emerging industries and foreign trade.
今年 是“十四五”规划收官之年。
As the 14th five-year plan concludes, pressing tasks in reform, development, and stability remain. We must stay confident, work hard, and execute tasks with precision to lay a strong foundation for the 15th five-year plan.
良好开局，打牢基础。
China has set a 5% growth target for the third year in a row. Officials pledge to step up fiscal support, boost consumer spending, and encourage private businesses and future industries. The session comes as trade tensions with the U.S. remain high. But with detailed plans to tackle challenges in trade, jobs, and real estate, lawmakers say they're confident about China's path forward.
Our economy remains large, and we're confident in our industries. Emerging sectors like AI and new energy are fueling future growth. As legal professionals, we supported the private sector and contributed to a law-based, market-driven, and international business environment.
This year's two sessions introduced new catchphrases into the government work report, from embodied AI to patient capital and childcare subsidies. This reflects China's push for a tech-driven economy while addressing everyday concerns. How these policies translate into action will be key as China embarks on a brand new five-year plan next year. Huang Fei, CGTN, Beijing.
There is much to talk about. Let's get to our panel. Qiang is the Assistant Director of the International Monetary Institute. Vicky Price is an international economist and business consultant. Also with us is Zoon Ahmed Khan. She is a research fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. And Djoomart Otorbaev joins us. He served as the Prime Minister of Kyrgyzstan. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Prime Minister Otorbaev, let me start with you. Thanks a lot for being with us. As we just heard, the China government work report, which was presented by the Premier to the National People's Congress, it set a growth rate for 2025 of 5%. It's also targeting inflation of around 2% and an official budget deficit of 4% of GDP. What do all these numbers tell you in terms of what the government's priorities are?
Currently, China passing the transformation of its economy. Priorities which went very important before in heavy investments into the real estate and infrastructure, not anymore bringing real results. What China did excellently is transforming its economy into high-tech industries. Priority to deliver modernization and high-quality development. And if you look for the green economy, then China is becoming #1 in the world in electrical vehicles, in solar cells, and other elements. And I believe that this more or less painful transition from one economic model, I would say extensive, to high quality, it will not be that easy. So now it is time to push even more for high quality development and invention in high technology. And I would say that government and private sector working together in order to achieve that goal. Recently, famous Australian think tank Make Analysis, who is leading in 64 of the top high technology areas. And out of 64, China is number 1 in 57 and number 2 in the rest. It's a remarkable result. And this brings clear understanding that this direction will be strengthened. And every day, every week, we see some inventions, some discoveries in high technology area. And we as neighbors in Central Asia of China, very excited about that because our population is very high educated. We wanted to join China's drive into high quality development. And of course, these 2 sessions results is very excited. It shows that it will be another goal of 5% growth. Will not be easy, but new instrument and mechanism will be activated to achieve this ambitious target.
Right, so very positive outlook. Zoon, of course, these 2 sessions meetings are very important because they chart the path forward and also show us what the government's priorities are. What were your key takeaways from this year's meetings?
Well, I think absolutely. I also agree with Prime Minister Otorbaev that you see a commitment to that drive to high quality development, and we also see results. I think one of the key aspects about this 2 sessions is also that we heard the term new quality productive forces, but there was limited understanding, especially in research circles. Gradually we understood what it means, and we see more high tech, more emphasis on high tech, more emphasis on technological advancement. We also see, I think this is another important aspect, that high tech and artificial intelligence and AI plus, I mean, all of that is obviously about advancement. And as was mentioned, China is leading in these industries globally. But the posture, the position, the priority is, again, to solve real world problems, to gear these, to channelize these high-tech industries in addressing real challenges, which means, better employment, better quality services, also helping many developing countries. Again, that remains a key priority for China, to keep itself engaged in this transition towards high quality productivity and technological advancement and leadership. China is still thinking about how can we further expand our partnership and collaboration with the world at large and also developing countries. So these 2 sessions, exhibit obviously a commitment to the goals that were marked last year, a commitment to global engagement, interaction, and also a commitment to a Chinese way of doing things, but one that is receptive of changing realities. So as we talk about, broader goals about China's technological advancement and investing in research and development, equally, there is an emphasis on rural-urban balancing. And I think that balancing factor in the 2 sessions is something that a lot of countries can learn from. We need to think about, high achievements, but at the same time, we need to think about what are the ordinary people achieving from these advancements. And that is something, again, which is quite commendable this year.
Yeah, Zoon, you were talking about some of the challenges that the country will face moving forward. I mean, one of those challenges is the current trade friction with the United States, with these tariffs that were initially imposed by President Trump. China has retaliated and said that it will protect its economy from the impact of tariffs. And when asked about the additional tariffs imposed on China by President Trump, the foreign minister, Wang Yi, he said, and I'm quoting him here, he said, "No country should fantasize that it can suppress China on the one hand and develop good relations on the other." So how do you see this trade war playing out?
Well, it's obviously, unfortunate that as soon as President Trump took office, this is the posture he chose to assume. I think China's response has been apt. and also accurate. China is not afraid to take a stand. China has invested in a global multilateral system and also expanded its cooperation with the world at large. But the relationship between China and the US remains important. At the same time, the United States and especially the Trump administration should recognize that they have not yet confronted a country with China's inertia. And in that sense, obviously, that response is perfect in its tone that we want to collaborate, we want to support open trade, and we want to be able to work together. But at the same time, if this continues from the United States, they will be able to respond. And I think Foreign Minister Wang Yi mentioned another very important aspect. He reminded the U.S. and he reminded the Trump administration who is benefiting from such policies. Has the trade deficit improved? Have the economic conditions of ordinary Americans improved by assuming hostility? So it's difficult to understand, what exactly the next months will look like. But what is clear is that China is not afraid to respond, and at the same time, China has very clearly, through example, through its track record, and by the foreign minister's own press conference, made it clear that China is not only willing but perfectly, is looking forward to working with the world. So in that sense, I think if there will be short-term disadvantages and obviously challenges, I think China is preparing itself to be better prepared. And at the same time, I think the world is looking towards China for stability in the global order.
Right, Qiang, getting back to that government work report, as I said, it was presented by Premier Li Qiang. He said at the opening of the National People's Congress that the targeted growth rate of around 5% underscores, and I'm going to use his words here, he says it underscores our resolve to meet difficulties head-on and strive hard to deliver. One of the big things that was talked about at these meetings this year was artificial intelligence. It was certainly a hot topic, and some have called the plan adopted by the NPC as China transforming the country into a technical powerhouse. So how big a role will advanced technologies play in the growth plan?
Well, Anand, you have to understand when an economy try to climb over the threshold from a middle-income country entering the middle and a higher-income country, they have to switch their growth pattern, shifting gears. For example, it happens with South Korea, Japan, Germany, France, as well as for the United States itself. Usually, when you used to have this labor-intensive industry to dominate our whole manufacturing industry, but later you have to use the technology and the high tech, what we call the new productive forces, to dominate your new, industries. So you will have some of the champions leading the whole sectors in the whole world, like what American is doing now with mobile internet, with the internet technologies, as well as for the Germany, they're dominating the very good mechanic industries. So I think these things are happening to China as well. So when China want to climb over this threshold, I think they will absolutely try to lead in the certain areas. For example, right now we've been seeing that China has been leading in AI in certain sectors, as well as for the robo technologies. So it will be a must. And as for how China is going to evolve into the future, I think it will happen like what happens to South Korea or Japan. Well, certain big companies will become the champions in the vertical area, but also most of the population or labor forces will switch to the service sectors. 50% of the population will definitely apply to a better job with a higher salary, higher wage, and a better social benefit. And that's going to be the due path for China. So I think according to today, this year's working report of the government, we were going to have another 10 trillion or 12 trillion yuan extra for the fiscal plans, for the financial stimuluses, and also try to uphold the social security bottom lines for all the people. So in the future, we're going to see China is going to inject more resources to prop up more of the garage startups to become the champions in their own sector, like the robotech, like the aviation, like the AI. But meanwhile, try to support more of the population to switch the role, going out of the factories, but going into service sectors, creativity industries, so that they can find a new role in the whole productivities in the GDP growth.
Vicky Price, great to have you with us. Welcome to the show. Now, the trade relationship, Vicky, between China and the European Union was one of resilience. If we look at the numbers from 2024, bilateral trade reached $762 billion. That's a 1.6% rise from the year before. There is still strong demand for Chinese goods in Europe. But now we have the Trump tariffs and we see the beginnings of this trade war. How would a China-US trade war impact Europe?
Well, it's really interesting that so far, of course, we haven't had any direct imposition of tariffs against European goods going to the US. So for the moment, I think Europe is just waiting to see what will happen and obviously trying to negotiate. But indeed, I mean, relationships on the trade front with China have been very strong. Basically, tariffs are not a good idea in terms of growth, and they also distort trade quite significantly. And that's a bit of a concern. But car manufacturers in Europe are much more concerned about the tariffs in the US, which might be imposed against them. And you've seen stocks of those companies really suffering, much more than they are really concerned about the diversion of trade from China into the EU, even though obviously there are some sectors such as electric vehicles where China now sort of dominates to quite a considerable extent in terms of the market over here. So there are clearly issues that we need to worry about, and the Europeans are trying to get their act together in terms of some industrial strategy that might give a little bit of protection in case, one or either of those scenarios emerges.
All right, Vicky, as you say, there are no direct tariffs imposed on imports from Europe, but if there's any one thing one could say about Donald Trump is that he is unpredictable. We don't know what he may do next. And that unpredictability or uncertainty, as it's sometimes referred to, that's, I know, a cliche, is not good for business, is it?
It's not at all good for business, and you're absolutely right. I mean, what we've seen is that the volatility index, if you look at the share prices, has really increased quite significantly. Some stocks doing well in Europe, of course, because of the extra spending which is expected to go into defense in the future. So you see quite a lot of variability going on there. But overall, no. If you have such volatility as we have now and such uncertainty, then companies will not want to invest, certainly not in Europe, until they are certain of what may happen in the future. There are already some signs that some companies are moving to the US to avoid some of those tariffs. But again, there is the issue of whether you can develop an industrial shield in Europe itself. There are now expectations that there's going to be huge extra investment taking place, which could be jointly funded by a number of countries. So there could even be a special bank that's set up on the defense front to raise funding so that it isn't borne by individual countries. So there is a lot of movement to get Europe to work more closely together, and therefore specialize perhaps across countries in the areas where we are strongest. And I think that could well happen, and that could give a little bit of extra support. But if you look at some of the forecasts right now for Europe, the European Commission has just downgraded its forecast for 2025 to just 0.8, 0.9%, depending whether you look at the EU as a whole or the Eurozone alone. That is down from over 1%. Yes, a bit of an improvement next year, but actually so much is up in the air that it's just not clear what will happen. So what they're doing instead is lowering interest rates a lot faster than anyone else, just to ensure that we don't sort of fall into recession over here.
Prime Minister Otorbaev, let's look at the bilateral relationship, China and Kyrgyzstan. China has been Kyrgyzstan's largest trading partner and a major source of its investment. Last year, bilateral trade reached nearly $23 billion. That is a record. Then, of course, we have the Belt and Road Initiative, which Kyrgyzstan is a member of that initiative, and that initiative has been expanded in the country. What can you tell us about the BRI's expansion in Kyrgyzstan and Chinese investment in the country?
Okay, indeed, it was a record year in bilateral trade between our relatively small country and China, and remarkably, 22.7 billion trade exceed Kyrgyzstan's GDP. This is a unique situation which exists in the world only within such tiny and maritime countries like Singapore. And we are a landlocked country, but in spite of that, our trade with China is enormous, growing every year in double digits. Why? we have a relatively good infrastructure. We have 2 highways, and those through highways we trade with China. But last year, 27th of December last year, the 3 governments of China, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan start to build railroad through Kyrgyz territory between China and Europe. This will be the shortest railroad distance between China and Europe, shortens the shortest one for another 900 kilometers, and it will bring enormous benefits, trade for all countries which, let's say, situated along the new Silk Road. It's Central Asia, Caspian Sea, so-called Middle Corridor, then South Caucasus, Turkey, further to Europe. Already now, the train from Qiang to Duisburg reach final destination in about 12 days. It will be even shorter. And this railroad delivery between China and Europe booming every year, growing with double digits. And we're looking forward for construction of really unique high-speed railway through our territory, which is mountainous country. And to my knowledge, it only something like 311 kilometers will be built of railroad in our territory, but it will be 81 bridge and 41 tunnels. Incredible.
Zoon, one of the other big developments at the 2 sessions meetings was the focus on education. We heard President Xi saying that the country's education system needs to change to meet the demands for talent in technology. What are some of the changes that are being envisaged?
Well, I mean, there's obviously the focus on high research and development, bringing in new programs that are focused on, critical thinking, problem solving. The focus on, obviously, high-tech education is also quite impressive. What I can say is that, in my last 10 years that I've lived in Beijing and I've been affiliated with Tsinghua University, for the most part, I saw how fast, the universities, even for the last 5, 6, 7 years, have been seeking new ways to make partnerships with international programs, with foreign universities, and to upgrade their curricula. This is a nationwide drive, really. We see that many engineering schools, different departments, they're looking for ways to be more innovative and to also expand their exposure to what's up and current in the world. So when it comes to the education system, of course, the Chinese people have definitely been looking for ways to make it more creative. There is a lot of emphasis in the Chinese culture also on education. And in that way, it's the policies and the people that will come together to ensure that more high advanced degrees are being introduced, and that children are also developing skills that are up and current. And we've seen that. Let me also quickly add that one of the things that China really stands up for now, especially, is the skill of its labor, is the skill of its people. And there's a big debate in Chinese media and policy circles how in different parts of the country, it's not only the top universities, but young people from unexpected universities and education backgrounds are creating platforms and technologies which are being recognized in the world. So that aspect of that high quality aspect or new productive forces, it also transcends into how education is approached.
Qiang, I've just got a few minutes left. I want to talk about artificial intelligence, AI, and the role it will play in China in the year ahead. We did see earlier this year that there was the startup DeepSeek, which unveiled its platform, and it sort of sent shockwaves around the world because it was produced at a fraction of the cost that it's costing, similar companies and models here in the United States, for instance. So what kind of impact do you see AI having on China's economy?
Well, I think the most important impact is efficiency. You're going to see with Robotech, with all these implementation of the AI, our factories is going to run faster, and all this can be translated to a sheer benefit of our companies. But actually, aside from the real economy, what makes the AI or high tech a real money maker is in the capital market, because in the real economy, the efficiency can be what maximally can be raised up like double or tripled. But in the capital market, if the investors understand understand that you're leading the technology like what America used to do, well, they probably will give you a higher PE, like 10 times, 20 times to start with. So that it's a faster money makers. And also, more than that, AI is just a beginning in China. It's just a beginner. While Chinese government is trying to implement AI in the driverless cab, and also try to use them in the old age nursing home and all the other applications. So that's going to release a lot of the labor forces and moving them into the workplaces with a higher added value. So we're going to see a major shift in the Chinese paradigm of the economic growth.
Vicky, getting back to something we were talking about a moment ago, and that is Trump's very liberal use of tariffs as his sort of primary tool of foreign policy. I mean, would it be sort of strategically wise for the European Union and China to expand and further develop their trade and economic links?
Well, we've seen that there have been a number of moves to try and do precisely that. So the world is getting a little bit more polarized, though, and that's not particularly good for anyone. So what we really need is to go back to really believing that open trade is good for everybody and not move into protectionism. But inevitably, what will happen in the process, because obviously we're not going to suddenly move into a world where there are no tariffs and no protectionism, is new alliances will be developing, and everyone will be looking to see where best those alliances might be. So yes, I think there is going to be a reorganization of trade flows without any doubt. But we'll see how long this period lasts, of course, because businesses in the US are very concerned. We've seen what's going on with the stock market there. A lot of pressure, I think, is probably being put on President Trump to rethink. And you never know how we might end up. Everything is so unpredictable right now.
Right, and that's where we are going to have to leave it. Thank you to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington.